I'd just like to ask, how many of you are interested in, let's say, Buddhism and mindfulness? Oh, isn't that amazing? It's incredible. How many of you have also, maybe in your past, done things like psychological, personal growth work? In the 60s, I was in something called a sensitivity group. Anybody remember that? Really? I'm with the right crowd. That's wonderful. Because I've been involved in all that stuff. I studied, anybody learn TM in the 60s? Really? Yeah. That was my first introduction to meditation. And then I got involved in Buddhism, and that was very helpful. Done a lot of meditation retreats. Have any of you done like long meditation retreats? Wow, amazing. That's great. Okay. Well, I hope I don't upset anybody too much with this book, Dancing with Fire, because although I'm very interested in Buddhism, spiritual path, I find that a lot of people on a spiritual path, they somehow bypass their feelings, deny their longings, deny what they really desire in terms of human connection and human relationships. Any of you found that people do that sometimes? Not any of you. But if you find people do that sometimes on a spiritual path, it can kind of be used to deny our humanity, avoid our human feelings. So I'll read a little bit from my book, which will say it better than I can speak it. For many years, I awkwardly straddled two worlds without being fully comfortable in either one. My spiritual buddies made a convincing case. The key to life is finding inner peace and liberation through meditation and spiritual practice. My psychologically minded friends made an equally compelling argument. To love and be loved is what life is all about. Contacting and expressing our human feelings and needs brings the love, joy, and juiciness that our heart longs for. My spiritual friends echo teachers who dismiss the value of personal growth. People who pursued interpersonal fulfillment were known as relationship junkies. Was that term used when you were younger? Did people use that word at all? They did in at Hofstra, where I went to college. People use it? Yeah. This path was viewed as feeding the ego and strengthening the personality, a seductive distraction from the awakening offered by meditation and spiritual work. Scowling from the other camp were the psychologically minded who viewed spirituality as an avoidance of feelings and a denial of basic human needs for love and intimacy. They dismissed meditation as self-centered navel-gazing. Was that term used when you were younger? Like you're a navel-gazer if you're meditating. People don't usually say that anymore, do they? Mindfulness has come a long way, right? So for many years, I wondered if we're working at cross purposes if we pursue spiritual practice and loving relationships. Over the course of many decades, what I once viewed as an unbridgeable gap, I now see as converging paths, suggesting that we must choose between interpersonal fulfillment and spiritual development is to overlook how these are two sides of the same coin of awakening. So this book explores how the path of liberation, a vibrant and intimate connection with life, is synonymous with satisfying love relationships. Okay. So finding skillful ways to bring the awareness gained through spiritual practice and self-inquiry into our relationships can heal the rifts that isolate us and divide the world. I'm going to read another section here. The time is right for us to pursue a spiritual life that is robustly interpersonally engaging. Our spiritual quest receives its grounding through intimate connections, and at the same time, the fertile stream of spiritual practice nourishes our relationships. Now, are any of you familiar with the Dalai Lama? Nobel Peace Prize winner. Do you like the Dalai Lama?
Yes.
Okay, let's hear it for the Dalai Lama. Okay. So, the Dalai Lama exemplifies a spiritual teacher who has no pretense about transcending his humanity. I really like that. He's very human. Once he said, and this is in the book too, I can be patient with children for short periods only. Anyone relate to that? Isn't that pretty honest for the Dalai Lama to say that? Really? He's very, very human, very human. So he was interviewed by a psychiatrist in this book, and he was asked by the interviewer if there was anything in his life that he regretted. And he recounted the story of an older monk interested in an advanced practice. The Dalai Lama responded that such a practice would perhaps be better for a younger person. Sorry. So later, he learned that the man went out and killed himself, wanting to be reborn in a younger body so he could undertake this practice. Right? Not a recommended thing to do, but in case any of you are considering that practice. Okay? So when asked by the interviewer how he got rid of the feelings of regret, he paused a long time, and then he responded. What do you imagine he might have said? How did he get over his feelings of regret?
He did.
She's a smart aleck. He didn't, she says. So here's what the Dalai Lama said. I didn't get rid of it. Very good, you're right. It's still there. Now, isn't that an honest revelation of his humanity to be able to say that? Because the image of being a spiritual person is what? That we transcend any regrets. Like Frank Sinatra sings in one of his songs, No Regrets. And his song, what's the name of that song? My Way. Right, remember that line? My Way. No regrets, few regrets. Something like that, kind of a lackadaisical attitude, maybe. So, I find it refreshing that the Dalai Lama paused before responding, because see, that's what's done in this process called focusing that I describe in the book, where we just kind of, this is actually based on research into what makes psychotherapy effective, which I describe in the book. That when clients paused, they just took their time before responding to a question. They weren't in their heads just intellectualizing, they were dropping down into their bodies, into their feelings, and responding from their felt sense of what felt right in that moment, what really felt connected in that moment. So the Dalai Lama paused. It was kind of like he was focusing. And he searched inside to notice what he felt in relation to the question. So how much deeper and richer our relationships could become if we all remembered to adopt the pregnant pause before responding. You know, often we respond so quickly to each other, right? People go, how are you? I'm fine. How are you? Fine. And not much is really exchanged, right? But if you slow down, well, how are you really? How are you really? Slow down. Just explore some of the textures of that. So one thing I find refreshing in this story is what the Dalai Lama didn't say. What didn't he say in response to that question of how he got over his, is there anything that he regretted, or how did he get over his regret? Well, note that the Dalai Lama didn't offer rationalizations to minimize the pain of this traumatic event, such as, you know, what are the kind of things people say in Marin and Sonoma counties in response to this kind of thing? What didn't he say? Okay. Anyone want to respond to that before we see what the...
Oh, everything's perfect. It's all
Sorry?
everything's perfect.
Everything's perfect. Right, that's the kind of thing we might, the spiritual, quote-unquote spiritual people might say. Everything's perfect. It's all good. Everything works out for the best, right?
Yeah.
It's all kind of glossed over, right?
Little. Sorry.
And also, the Dalai Lama didn't say, it was his decision to kill himself, it's not my responsibility. I found that really refreshing. He didn't say he created his own reality. I mean, is it just me, it just drives you crazy when people use that expression, you create your own reality. I mean, sure, there's some truth in it. We certainly participate in co-creating what happens to us. But that would overlook the fact that we affect each other as human beings. We affect each other. And we need to be sensitive to how we treat each other, instead of just dismissing things with these rational and kind of new age kind of sayings.
I'd like to have some time for questions.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm going on. I think you get the idea, though. So, we're in this life together, we affect each other. So thanks for listening to that. And,
Are there any questions for John?
please.
Mona?
Have you personally met the Dalai Lama?
No, I haven't met the Dalai Lama. I've seen him in videos. I would like to meet him sometime.
Can you explain when I was reading your biography, that last line of your biography, what that meant?
What was the last line about focusing?
Focusing.
A focusing
focusing?
trainer.
Focusing trainer means I use focusing in my psychotherapy practice, and I give talks on focusing, and when I travel different places in the world, often I speak about focusing, and it's a way to drop down into our felt experience. See, the people that were making progress in psychotherapy, according to this research, it's very interesting, they were actually focusing. Focusing is not something that Eugene Genlin, who developed this, he didn't invent it, he just observed it in people that were making progress. These were the naturally gifted clients who were making progress in therapy. They were dropping down into their feelings, noticing how they were feeling in their body, and speaking from their felt experience.
Instead of immediately answering.
Right, instead of immediately answering from their heads. One story I tell in the book is a woman was giving birth, a child, and she had a midwife, and she was afraid giving birth. The midwife said, or maybe it was the nurse, there's nothing to be afraid of. She was trying to reassure her. And she said, but I am afraid. And then her husband, who knew focusing, came to her and said, I really hear that you're afraid. And she immediately calmed down, she felt heard, and proceeded to have a wonderful baby. We all just need our feelings to be heard, validated, but we need to honor what we're really feeling, what we're really experiencing, not what we think we should be feeling. And then part of focusing when you do it with somebody else is to really hear them and be present with them and validate what they're experiencing.
Another question over here.
So that idea brings this question to me. Do you find some people who have a very difficult time knowing what they're feeling?
Oh, yeah. I think we all can relate to that. We all have a difficult time really getting connected to what we're feeling, and it really takes time. And in this research, Genlin talks about how it often takes at least 30 seconds to even begin to get some sense of what we're really feeling inside. So instead of feeling obligated to answer so quickly, it really takes some time, slow down, maybe take a breath. And sometimes the body gives us clues, like is your stomach tight, is your chest constricted, is your throat tight? And that might give you some clue about what the felt sense is. Maybe there's some fear, maybe there's some sadness, maybe there's some hurt, maybe there's some sense of, gee, my feelings are unimportant to my partner. I don't feel like I'm very important. I don't feel very valued. It could be a felt sense that's not just a feeling, but a feeling can be part of it. But it also has a meaning to it. It has to do with something in your life. It has to do something with a relationship.
One last question.
I have a question. If you were living in a community, would you be concerned about calling it a spiritual community? And if so, how would you avoid divisions within a spiritual community and judgmentalness and self-righteousness? Are there kind of some easy ways that you can see of avoiding some of these?
How to avoid a certain kind of self-righteousness is the question.
Yeah.
In communities where people consider it to be a spiritual community.
Exactly.
Yeah. It kind of raises an interesting question of what does it mean to be a spiritual person? Or the word spiritual gets so overused, doesn't it? And I think some of the most spiritual people are people who would totally freak out if you call them spiritual. Like they wouldn't want to be identified as a spiritual person. But actually they're very spiritual because their heart is open, they know how to connect, they know how to engage with others. So I think often what happens is people identify, they cling to a self-image of being spiritual. They have some self-image of themselves, which actually disconnects them from each other and from themselves. So I think we have to kind of look beyond what our self-image is and see spirituality as something that's more about engaging with ourselves, each other, and with life with an open heart, a kind and engaging sense of presence with ourselves and with each other. And humility, I think, is an important, really essential part of the spiritual path, and not holding on to our ego. So I just want to say I took 10 years writing this book. I really put a lot of care into it. And if you want to take a look at it, that would be delightful. Thanks for having me here.